Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another session of the Studio Rats live Q&A.
He's got his button again.
It's good, that button.
Got his button.
I love that.
Please welcome the man to my right, your left, Mr. Gary Bromham.
Good evening.
I promise that's the last time I press that button.
Good.
Yeah, please. I'm going, actually. If you do that again, I'm going.
Gary and I have known each other for around about 20-something years, and in reminiscing just before we came on air, we've both remembered that we're actually from the same part of the world, which is
Suffolk.
kind of scary and silly Suffolk-like.
The flatlands.
Yeah, well, yes, yeah.
It's not as flat as Norfolk, though.
No. we switched into the Suffolk boy accent, you'll be all right. I embarrassed myself even that moment.
Yeah.
So welcome to the craziness that is the Studio Rats live Q&A podcasty live streamy type thing. Hopefully I can see there's people out there in the real world.
Hey.
Ladies and gentlemen out there, give us a shout, put some comments in. If you've got some questions for Gary, add them to the comments down the side. We can see them, he can see them, so we'll get to those in time. But Gary, just tell us a little bit about your journey to right now, because obviously we're heading towards another glorious lockdown. Yeah, I should press the button again. But you've been in the sharp end of the industry. I mean, we met. You had a studio up on the 7th floor of a building behind Hamleys in London.
Oh, in Kingley Street.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to go back. Let's stay in Soho. Let's go back Trident and sort of pre-Trident. I'll just tell you quickly how I actually got into this industry, because it was an accident. I was taking an English literature degree, and I bought an amplifier. It was a Roland Bolt 60. Do you remember the Roland Bolt 60? What a great amp. And I go to this studio, Stratford Place, Chrysalis Studios, and there was this dude there that some particularly songwriters amongst you will have heard of, called Simon Climie, who wrote I Knew You Were Waiting for George Michael and Aretha Franklin. And Simon was selling his amplifier, which I bought from him. And I just got chatting with him. He's really, really nice guy, and said, "Oh, you know, what do you do?" And I said, "Well, I kind of dabble a bit. It's always that kind of thing." And he introduced me to his manager, actually, Dee Harrington. I don't know if you remember. She was married to Rod Stewart for a while, actually. And so anyway, what happened was Simon at the time was a Fairlight programmer. And I used to go round to Simon's place, actually, like after we got sort of to know each other. And this was the Series 2 Fairlight. So this was the old 8-bit one. And I used to go around and I taught myself how to program that. And believe me, that was no mean feat. There was no mouse or anything like that. It was all command line stuff. Mm-hmm. So literally it was stupid. So you had to literally tell it everything that you wanted it to do. And then really Dee suggested, who became my manager, she suggested, "Oh, you could probably do with some time as an apprentice in a studio." So that's really when I applied to Trident Studios in St Anne's Court. And Trident was really was just it was kind of like you either wanted to work at Psalm with Trevor Horn, or you wanted to work at Trident. And at that point, really, Flood was the chief engineer there. Mm-hmm. And so it was Flood, Spike, Alan Moulder, Chenzo.
What have they got on to do, eh?
Nothing at all. Nothing at all. So it was just an amazing place to be. And so I did the usual. I was a T-boy for a while, tape op. And then I kind of went more in the direction of programming, actually, because it was like that sort of time, around that sort of time, people were just kind of getting into all of the kind of possibilities of what you could do with technology. And so I was kind of programming Lindrum, Fairlight, emulator, all of that kind of stuff. And there were some really interesting bands that came through at that point, like sort of Tears for Fears, Go West, all of those kinds of bands. So yeah, that's where I started.
Proper stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, Torquay's in the house.
Torquay's in the house. Yeah. So then I guess really just leading on from that, I'll try and be as brief as possible, otherwise people will leave. I weirdly enough, the first proper production gig I got was through a guitarist called Alan Murphy. Do you remember Al Murphy?
Yeah.
So Al used to be the guitarist for Kate Bush. He was he did all of her early albums, and Al was in doing a session for somebody, and he said to me, "You don't fancy going to Iceland, do you?" And I'm going, "No."
What? It wasn't. It used to be called B Jams back then, right?
Yeah, exactly. The supermarket. I knew you were going to go there, and
That
actually,
is the best joke. That's the well, it's the only funny joke you've ever done. That's definitely the best joke you've ever done.
The thumb bass, the thumb book was the best joke I've ever done. We know that. You know the one about Dan and his book and his funk book? His funk bass book? You thumb your way through it. That's the best joke I've ever done.
That's a bit dead. But anyway.
Iceland is definitely up there.
Sorry, totally. Yeah. So I'll expand and say Reykjavik just to make things a little clearer. Yeah. So I went up to Reykjavik, and I hadn't got a clue what I was doing. And actually, I think unless any of us are just consummate liars, we all kind of did a lot of our learning. I mean, we didn't have any universities or colleges really per se in those days, so you kind of learned on the job. And I kind of really, when I think about it now, it's quite daunting. At the time, it didn't even cross my mind. But I made what then I guess was an EP with Björk.
Wow.
So that was a band called Kukla, her and a guitarist called Gully. This was even before Sugar Cubes, bear in mind.
Oh wow.
And I did half an album with a band called Mezza Forte. Do you remember that jazz funk garden party? Yeah. So I did a whole load of stuff with them. I also did the Eurovision entry as well in Iceland. So I was kind of learning on the job, and I remember thinking I committed all of those crimes, like a U87 facing the wrong way and trying to work out why I couldn't get any level, cranking up the preamp, and it's all of those kinds of things that you sort of you never want to confess to. But I guess I'm getting to that point in my life.
We've all done them.
We've all done them, and we shall do them again. Absolutely.
Oh, yeah. How many times have you turned the treble up on an EQ thinking, why is this not making any difference? Oh, that's better, and realised it's in bypass.
Well, actually, I was going to get to that. My PhD is all about perception, and I'm telling you this, you'd be shocked at some of the stories I would tell you where people think they're hearing things. Yeah, actually, I love the fact that Audient have got a DFA button on their desk. You've got a DFA button, haven't you?
It's down here,
yeah. No, numerous times you would have A&R. I've been there plenty of times when an A&R person's come into a studio and they've gone, "Oh, I think that vocal needs more reverb," or I think that needs brightening up. And you go, a bit like that. They go, "Yeah, that's perfect." And of course, you did nothing to it. Yeah, absolutely. Sorry.
I saw a great one the other day that someone said on Facebook, always leave the first channel free so the A&R has something to do.
That's fabulous. Actually, I thought you were going to mention channel 24 then, actually, because some of my students have been mixing some multi-tracks. I shouldn't really tell this. This is like a name and shame time. And they went, "There's this weird sound on here. I just cannot get this to fit in the mix." And I said, "That's Simpty." They're sitting there and they're gating it, and of course they're sidechaining it. They would sidechain it. It was just hilarious, and I just thought, well, why would you know? And I just actually it brought back those shivers to me, because I can remember I mean, the next project that I did, obviously working with Andrew Ridgely and George Michael, when I came back from Iceland, we did everything then on 48 track, and we always had, I can remember working at Maison Rouge on something or other we were working on there, and having to spin vocals in, and everybody takes that for granted now, where you'll have a chorus of backing vocals and you just spin them in Pro Tools Logic or whatever DAW you're using. And I can remember all of us standing around in the studio, we're dropping these choruses in. There's 4 choruses at the end of a song, and everyone looks around going, "Does that sound all right to you?" We see the chalk mark going past their head, and I'm thinking, "Ooh, yeah, does that sound right?" And everyone, there's all this kind of paranoia. And when I listen back to those records now, I can hear all the choruses have totally different timings, and all the BVs and guitars and things we were spinning in. But actually, in some ways, that's kind of what gives it a bit of charm. Actually,
so maybe that's what's. How are you dropping them in with the Fairlight or with a?
No, so I was doing it between 124, one Studer and another.
Oh, okay.
So I was literally just dropping the second Studer in. But I was having to lock them up with time code. And what you do is you'd use this. I can't remember what it's called. I know Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations, but I'm sure it was called an Adam Smith synchronizer.
Oh, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
Oh,
Someone's going to post now. They're going to go. It was called a. Yeah.
Oh.
Anyway, it was a synchronizer.
The offset in by the chorus.
Yeah. So you'd sit there with time. I can remember in those days that the tape boxes were just covered in SMPTE cues where you'd be like, oh, chorus 2 starts at 2 minutes 32 seconds and however many frames and bits and whatever, and that's kind of the way you used to work. I thought that was quite an interesting insight. I've gone off track now, haven't I? Your
discography is not far off a who's who of sort of 80s 90s pop. I
made tea for them all. No, I'm only joking.
There is one I think we should mention. I think probably the highlight of your career, which is Gina G.
Oh my God, I can't believe it. Discogs. It's so. There are so many things I've looked at that. Actually, there are things on there that I never did, never went anywhere near, and there are plenty of things I've done that are not on there. So there you go. There we go. But I guess after
Danny Litchfield, by the way.
The legend of Danny Litchfield.
The legend that is Litchfield.
The legend.
Sorry, apologies.
No, so I was just going to say, so basically after I'm going to do this really quickly. So after Reykjavik, I worked with a great engineer there called Paul Gomersall, and Paul had done all the Wham albums, and Paul said, I've got this friend that you should meet. He needs someone like you. And I thought, God, that sounds really ominous. And it wound up being Andrew Ridgeley. And Andrew and I became really good friends, despite his car crashing and other various things I won't go into on here. I wound up kind of producing and writing most of the ill-fated Andrew Ridgeley solo album. But I guess the great thing with that album was the fact that I did a lot of that album with George. And George was in between he'd done Faith, and he was like, this megastar. And I can still remember him coming in the studio and being like, I don't want to be a pop star anymore. And that was where he was writing Listen Without Prejudice. And Listen Without Prejudice is an amazing record when I think about all the stories that he told me about. All the songs were kind of written in his head, and he would carry them. Now we sort of have this obsession with getting something down, a voice memo or whatever. And I remember him saying to me, yeah, if it won't stay in my head, then it isn't good enough, And he could sing you the bass line, the drum part, he could sing you everything.
Wow.
But the funniest thing about George, a story that I was thinking about earlier when I knew that I was coming on here, was so he used to do all of his stuff on a Mitsubishi 32 track digital machine. Okay, 32 tracks. Everyone's going, oh my God, 32 tracks. I never ever saw George fill that 32 track machine ever. So I remember thinking, Jesus, we've only got 17 tracks on this song. And it was, I'm trying to think which song it was now. It was I can't remember what it might have been, Fast Love or something like that. And George would bounce all the drums to stereo. And I'd be like, well, surely you want the kick and the snare and other things separate. Oh, no, I like the way it sounds. And also, the other thing that used to really blow me away about him was he never allowed mastering engineers to touch his records. They could make it louder, but they weren't allowed to do anything else.
Wow.
So do not touch the EQ. And actually, if you listen to the sibilants on his records, arguably, some de-essing would not have gone amiss there.
Yeah, a little bit of top off the reverb as well, if you don't mind.
Oh
George.
My God! We used to say he used to use that EMT plate, and he'd have an AMS with 30 and 40 milliseconds left and right, feeding into that EMT plate, and we'd be like, we must somehow take some top end off of this because it's literally ripping our heads off in the studio. But hey. He had hit records, several of them.
He sold one or two, hasn't he? Let's face it.
He did. Yeah, he was great. You're waiting for.
I'm just trying to stop Danny Litchfield from calling me. I do apologise. I'm just saying, don't call me. Hold on.
Let him in if he wants to ask us questions about George Michael's cowboy boots. Then he can come in.
He's a big George Michael fan. Actually, he's told Danny.
6'9"?
Huh?
So Paul Fierro just said my jokes are on fire. So you said Danny Litchfield's a big George Michael fan. So I said what, 6'8", 6'9"? Never mind.
No. Oh, you see, you're letting yourself down.
Fabulous.
It's terrible stuff.
Those cowboy boots. Actually, I must just say before we move on, they were so off-putting when he would go in and do. I can remember him going in and doing some backing vocals on something. This was at Maison Rouge, actually. I remember because we used to work there a lot. Chelsea Football Club, for any Chelsea fans in here. That's where that studio used to be. And I remember timidly putting my finger on the talkback button and going, "Is there any way you could do that again, George, without tapping your foot?" Yeah, and we already put a rug down to sort of, and he didn't say a word to me. He just came out and he went, "Play it to me." So he played it back and he said, "I can't hear anything." And it taught me such an important lesson. I thought, yes, all about the performance. Just George was not interested in the technology. It was like, it was all about the song and the performance. So yeah,
I can't remember who said it, but it was a fairly famous, crooner level singer. I mean, Frank Sinatra-esque, and it wasn't an Al Schmidt story before Paul jumps in and says, and engineer says to artist, "Can we just do one for safety?" And the artist comes back with, "Whose safety, mine or yours?"
Oh yeah.
It's so funny actually. I was chatting with Steve Lillywhite about this the other night, and he was saying about what was he talking? I think he was talking about Intruder, either that track on Gabriel 3, or he was talking, I can't remember, it was that Collins drum sound, and they did a first take on something and it sounded so amazing, and everyone sort of looked around and it was like, "Get some more tracks." It's like, well, we haven't got any more tracks, and it's like, and Collins just said, "Oh, fuck off, I'll just do it again." He said, "I can easily," and literally, apart from inserting a couple of kick drums in a slightly different place, he did it perfectly. And I think in some ways, I'm going to get all a bit serious and preachy now. I think some of that is missing actually now. None of those things were retimed. A lot of things we weren't tuning stuff. I think it just sounded great how it was actually. I think we obsess about that, don't we?
Don't you listen back to 80s records, some 80s records that you didn't notice at the time, and then you think, God, the pitch is terrible on that.
Yeah, and actually I can share with you. So I can't, the singer I'm talking about now.
But you can't say it out loud.
No, I can't say it out loud, but you know who I'm talking about. So what I used to do, Paul, is I used to EQ out the tuning bit of a word. So what I would do is I'd be comping stuff. And what I would do is I just run it down a channel, usually on the SSL. And if there was a note that was a little bit flat, what I would do is I would literally just EQ out that part of the tone, if you like, and then I put it back in again for the next word. So I just take that out. Also, the other thing I learned a really important lesson from, I'm going to have to credit him for this, because I never really worked this out for years, was Tony Swain. Swain and Jolly. He did all those Spandau Ballet records. And he said, the problem is, he said, if something's out of tune, people always turn it down, and that's the opposite to what they should do. They should turn it up. And actually, the psychology basically there is that if you try to hide something, it will draw way more attention to itself than something if you just flaunt it. And I guess, can we name people? We can name bands from the 80s, can't we, on here?
Yes.
I'm going to have to name Simon Le Bon. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to go there. Yeah, because I am amazed that any of those records sound as good, because I knew people that were involved in those records, and I remember it was like it's been days and days trying to get those records right. And you remember the big Live Aid? You remember the Live Aid thing?
Yep.
If you don't, you need to go and watch it again.
I have it on DVD.
Oh,
and you play it over and over again in a sampler. You just keep playing it over again. Yeah. So that's what we used to do. We used to just EQ out. So in answer to your question there, Paul, I guess what I used to do the AMS thing though. I'd pitch it up. That was the AMS delay, the 1580 or whatever it was. I remember having to just shove stuff in there and pitch it up and down. And we used to use this thing as well called a Publison Infernal machine, which was also a brilliant thing for pitching. And then there was always the Eventide as well, the early Eventide pitch shifters.
Wow. So fast forward through meeting me the first time round, because then went off and did other crazy things. But you've got into research and say as I said in the promo, we should actually be addressing you as Dr. Gary Bromham, PhD.
Almost. Yeah.
Very
Almost.
nearly.
Yeah.
As near as I'm going to get to it, because you're not getting that from me. My brother's a PhD, and I don't call him Dr. James Betts either. So no, you're not getting that. He's
it's only people you hate that you insist they address you as doctor.
Yeah. So maybe I should start calling my brother that. So, but you've now got deep into research and PhD stuff, and presumably there was a master's in there as well, and you're now lecturing and doing all this sort of craziness. How did that come along? Because that's a bit of a lights from being, a working.
It was self-enforced, really. It was self-enforced because basically the company Terra Firma, Guy Hands specifically, ran out of money towards the end of it would have been about sort of 2008, 2009. And I can remember I was working quite a lot at Olympic then, and we just get this word that they're going to sell Olympic Studios, which I still haven't quite got over it, even sort of, 11 years later, because that was, it was such a classic studio. And that really became I guess, the next version of Trident, in the sense that all the really good people were working there. And I kind of, when that studio closed down, I suddenly went, oh my God, it's all changed. I mean, I don't want to come on here painting this negative picture of production, music, but let's be blunt, budgets were way down from what, I mean, in the 90s, we were getting paid just extortionate amounts of money and probably didn't deserve it. And record companies were just throwing money around. Whereas that really changed for me in the early kind of noughties, and particularly towards the end of that, people were doing records on, tiny budgets. A lot of that, I guess, is because of the democratization of mainstream music technology. And what happened was I left Olympic, and a friend of mine, Mark Altacruz, he's still a good friend of mine. He was really the chief audio person for Apple in the whole of Europe. Mark said to me, we really want somebody to go out and say nice things about our software, but we don't want someone wearing an Apple t-shirt. We want someone who's actually made some records and knows what this, how to use this software in a creative way. And my initial thought was, oh shit, I can't do that. I wouldn't know how to tell you what a de-esser does. I wouldn't know how to explain or articulate any of these things. And actually, it led me on a journey where I suddenly started to question all of my kind of workflow, work processes, and why I did things. And it coincided with weirdly enough, I was doing a mixing masterclass for somebody. And this guy comes up to me, you couldn't make this up, from Trondheim in Norway, and his name was Tron. Great. And he's now he's now a professor actually at the university, and he was doing his PhD. And he said to me, I'm really looking for a supervisor for a second. I've got an academic. What I want somebody from industry to help me, with my research. And I said, mate, wrong person. I said, the academia frightens the life out of me. And sure enough, I somehow we went to the pub and we agreed after about 8 pints of lager that I would be his.
Do that to you.
That it can happen, can't it? And so anyway, I kind of trotted off to Norway and joined this artistic research council, and I suddenly became involved in, and believe me, they were scary people that start talking to you about, ontologies and about sort of psychoacoustics and all of those kinds of things, which I guess we do every day as engineers, but we don't think about them in those terms. And I just started to investigate, why we did certain things. I became very interested in the idea of kind of chance in music, a la Brian Eno, all of those kinds of things, probability, dice music, as they call it in experimental music, or aleatoric music. I became interested in all of these things, but I became very interested specifically in the psychology of why we did things. And it coincided with a time when there was a lot of, it occurred to me, what were metaphors? In fact, there are more than ever in digital music technology. And I thought, so this is interesting. If I've got a Fairchild, this plugin of a Fairchild, I've used a Fairchild loads of times. And actually, I never wanted to see that needle move at all, because actually it wasn't a very good compressor. It was a great color box. The tubes, the transformers, transistors, whatever they were they colored the sound in an amazing way. And it suddenly became sort of apparent to me that there was a disconnect between what was going on in terms of these metaphors that were being sold in technology and the true meaning of those things. And I remember looking back at analog technology and thinking it was fraught with difficulties. The interesting thing about analog was everything that was wrong with it, not everything that was right with it. And the whole idea with analog, really, what you were trying to do is you were trying to approximate perfection. And then it seemed to me that these plugins were trying to perfect approximation. So they were kind of doing the opposite thing. They had the opposite kind of goal. I also started running a lot of perceptual tests where I would get people to look at things and see how much it influenced what they were hearing. Hence this psychoacoustic angle and music perception angle. And it became very apparent to me that we were heavily influenced by what we saw. And I know a lot of people kind of have this, they're on this mantra at the moment of, oh, we shouldn't be looking at sound. And we do look at it. I mean, I'm not kind of, I'm not turning my back on, 30 years of technology. I mean, I remember when samplers, I remember the first time I could look at a waveform and I could get the start and the end time right. Because, I mean, I grew up using MPCs where you would have to just tune the sample down 2 octaves to be able to find the start time. So I loved all of that kind of thing. And also I loved the idea of being able to, to color everything, and everything was much better organized. I could label stuff properly. But it occurred to me that we were very obsessed with looking at the past. And I was thinking, well, so what's the future? With technology, why are we doing this thing? And I started interviewing loads of people. I interviewed Spike, Chad Blake, Mike Exeter actually was on here. And it became apparent to me that none of these people are interested in the technology that it was modeling. They were all very, very interested in looking at them and treating them as new tools. So I think for me, kind of plugin technology, I absolutely love, of course I use plugins. I love plugins. I mean, I all the obvious. Am I allowed to plug anyone on here or not?
You can. We have no borders, no boundaries.
Okay. I mean, there are amazing things. I mean, for me, obviously UA. I mean, UA for me, obviously, it does suggest certain things in technology. But I just absolutely take my hat off to what they're doing with Luna. I just think it's, in a way, it's kind of detracting. It's kind of forcing me to listen to it a little more rather than look at it. And I guess the thing with my research was I was trying to look at how our perception of music has been altered by this kind of use of the traditional paradigm. And I actually love companies like, which is going against totally what I just said, actually. I'm going to contradict myself now. I love companies like Ableton, and I used to use Reason as well, because I used to think, actually, I kind of like this idea that I can work in clips, almost like maybe Tangerine Dream were doing in the early 70s, or maybe Kraftwerk. I like this idea of not being fixed to a set timeline. Really, that whole idea comes from tape. And I thought, well, why are we still using tape as a kind of reference point? That is so 30 years ago. Why are we doing these things? The other thing which I also became very interested in, I joined a research project at Queen Mary, which was the original reason for me doing my own PhD. And the whole basis of it was a kind of semantic audio production. So the idea of, when we say something is warm or muddy and we can have a row about it. And the answer is it's neither, and it's both. And it became, Waves were also involved in this project that we were working on there. And one of the things that they were very interested in was this idea of, do people really want to use scientific terminology when they're making records? Or would they rather just have something like, oh, I want a pillowy vocal, or I want a punchy drum, And actually, what we worked out within this research project, that of course you've got your professionals at one end of the scale, and you've got your amateurs at the other end of the scale. But this whole area in the middle, what we call pro-ams, professional amateurs, they want a professional result, but they don't give a shit about how they get it. They don't want to know. They don't care whether it's deficient at 251 hertz, or whether it's whether the ratio and the attack and the release and all of these kind of things. They're very interested in how you would describe that semantically. I want to achieve this result, and therefore, how do I map that to parameters? I'll shut up for a minute.
Don't you think though? But don't you think that isn't that sort of what Isotope is doing, James? I mean, you're doing some stuff for Isotope.
Yeah. I was going to say, actually, along with Isotope, some of the kind of the one knob plugins and the kind of the CLA drums, things like that, it gives you parameters like punch and brightness and low end or something like that, not an actual frequency range or anything like that, or I'm trying to think of some of the other ones, even like the Waves one knob stuff where you just do more of it, do more of that thing. And the fact that there's multiple processes happening in the background, the further up you turn the knob, I don't care. I couldn't go monkeys. I just want it to sound good.
Yeah, exactly. And
there's a lot of that whole kind of, using a one knob plugin is cheating. Rubbish.
Yeah.
You must feel a little bit dirty when you do it, though. Don't you feel a little bit dirty?
Not even the slightest. I mixed drums this afternoon, and I put CLA drums on everything because I knew it was going to sound good. I knew it would do. I knew it would do what I wanted to do.
So here's a concept for both of you, and I wrote a chapter in a book about this, which is the role of the preset. And I remember I'm gonna have to go there on this. So it occurred to me, I started to see this with Apple first. It was like things like reverbs on inserts started to really trouble me, and then you have people saying, why is my mix so muddy? And I'm going, you got 27 reverbs on there. Oh, have I? I thought that was part of the sound. And I'm going, well, it might be, but actually we used to have 1 or 2 reverbs, and they're going, oh yeah, but you're old fashioned, and all this kind of thing. And I'm saying, but there is a certain logic behind this idea of glue and creating a coherent sound in a mix. And I guess the thing here's the controversial bit. I'd be interested to know if you agree or disagree with this. So it occurs to me that presets are designed for people who don't know what they're doing, but they're way safer with people that do know what they're doing. And so in other words, the word I used was interrogate. You need to learn how to interrogate technology before you should start. So a classic would be a bass. I mean, what is it? Is it a Moog bass? Is it an upright bass? Is it a Fender Precision? What kind of bass is it? There's no such thing as a generic bass. And then when you bring masking in mixing into that argument, you're in big trouble, because it's like, no, that's never going to work. But, and here's where the two Jonathans, obviously Jonathan Weiner and Jonathan, I've forgotten his surname, and I speak to him occasionally, at Isotope.
I don't know.
Your boss, James.
I'm not far enough up the tree.
So actually, so here's the idea, because I've talked to them both about this. So here's the thing about AI for me, because we do a lot of AI at Queen Mary, and I just published a journal paper on context in AI. Okay, and I had this out with Jonathan Weiner. I said, the problem for me with AI, I think it's amazing. Yeah, I love the idea of something doing a rough balance. I love it making decisions based upon the fact that bass is mono, therefore we need to keep that quite central. And I like the idea of, I've got 2 guitars, so it'll pan one left and one right. Yeah, so these are kind of what we call rule sets in AI, and machine learning is very much based on rules. The problem is, what about in statistics, we call them outliers. What about the exceptions? Because you know what? Exceptions are where the creativity is. And if you listen to a track like Creep by Radiohead, it breaks all the rules of mixing. The guitar's way too loud. It masks the vocal in the chorus. How do you teach a computer to do something wrong like that?
Yeah. Just making everything generic. Yeah.
You're making it generic. But here's where I really think that and Isotope totally get this. And this is where I think they're way ahead of a lot of people. They get the fact that AI should be assistive. It's not there to replace anyone.
Absolutely.
So in other words, co-creativity is the term that we should all be thinking about now. So I'm sitting in a mix and I'm stuck. It goes back to the preset thing. What I do is I click on a button, maybe with what's it called? Tonal balance, or the thing in...
There's tonal balance control, which is where it looks across your mix and says, oh, you've got too much bass, you've got not enough top end or whatever. And then there's all the different assistants. So there's the mix assistant. Which is
that's it. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah. So the idea for me with this is, okay, I get stuck in a mix and I hit a preset, or I get it to analyze the audio and come up with a suggestion. And then it's like this kind of a moment of awakening where I go, oh yeah, it isn't quite right. That isn't quite what I want, but it's led me down this journey, led me on this journey down this path. It's making a suggestion. And then what happens is I respond or I react to that. So in my opinion, where AI will start to really come into its own is where it works in what we call a kind of cross-adaptive way, where the human interacts with the computer, but actually the computer's interacting with the human, and they're both making suggestions.
That's yeah, really good. Much
so
better.
Anyway, I'll shut up.
Can we do the question? Can we do the question? Because Hank's written a question. Hank says, I think this was a subject ago when we were talking about compressors, and that's a great perspective. I would really like to get a solid compressor and EQ with a wide range of usefulness. Would you recommend something from UAD or maybe FabFilter? I would say my skill is low intermediate with these tools, and I want something to learn with.
So probably not something with 1,000 buttons and sliders and whatever. Oops, just knocked my headphone out. The problem is, Hank, I'm prejudiced already by things that I know. So therefore, for me, I go for a VCA kind of style bus compressor if I want something over a whole mix. And I already know what kind of settings I'm going to kind of, you know, I'm going to go for a slow attack and a fast kind of release. It's, I guess for me, I'm just trying to think of, I will always look for things with simplicity. I mean, I used to use an LA28 all the time because actually the 1176 confused me, because all the attack and the release were the wrong way around, and I could never get it to do what. So actually, I loved the fact that this thing just had gain reduction on it. And what I would do is I just turn that knob until it sounded good. But I guess in terms of your question there, for me, I love FabFilter as a company, and I love them because they are not using these metaphors. They are producing new tools. I also love that Oak. Is it Oak Sound? That Soothe plugin.
Yes, Soothe.
That's. Yeah, I mean, that's not just for de-essing for me. That's like, you know, that scratchy acoustic guitars, that's cymbals. Yeah. It's all of that kind of stuff. A solid compressor. I would go for the G-Bus compressor because I know it. Or I would probably go for, I'm just trying to think. I love the Glue compressor. Probably it's a similar kind of vein. I really like something that does that kind of 33609. I mean, the UAD 33609. It's really fantastic. Good. So yeah. I guess the 2254 diode bridge style compressor, they would probably be my go-tos. In terms of EQ, the mags.
Yes.
I confess I still use hardware, actually. So actually, the other thing I have to add to this is I am still using a hardware bus compressor and a hardware EQ with an SSL Fusion, which is kind of like my...
you got oh, nice. Yeah, those Fusions are great. And I don't think he's particularly talking about bus compressors, but I could be wrong.
Oh, so what's he saying? So
a solid compressor.
A solid compressor. So okay.
And I think he means like an all-purpose.
Yeah.
An all-purpose compressor. Actually, God, I'm trying not to plug companies on here, but Cush Audio just make the most brilliant plugins.
Yes.
I absolutely love that. What is that amazing plugin that they've got? I'm so hoping to get old.
UBK1, is it?
It's not the UBK1. No, it's the one. Oh God, what is it called? It's so brilliant. I have to look it up in a minute. So Cush Audio, I really like that. That's very, very versatile. But what I was going to, just as a little sidetrack here. So I published a paper in 2018 at AES about stylistics in compressors. Now, and it was because we were trying to train an AI to understand which compressors were appropriate for which sets of program material. And of course, I went back to thinking, yeah, I would use an LA2A if I was processing a bass or a vocal, because it has a very fast attack and a very slow release. And it kind of smooths stuff out. I would also probably use that in conjunction with an 1176 that would catch peaks and then smooth stuff out. I would probably use an SSL style VCA compressor over maybe a drum bus or maybe over my whole mix. So the point I was trying to get across in this paper is there is a sense of appropriateness when we use technology, and certain pieces, certain styles of compressor suit certain program material. Yeah. Finding one that suits them all, it's really tricky actually, this, and I'll share something with you here. I interviewed Chad Blake. I'm writing a book about distortion and saturation, and Chad made an amazing statement, actually, which you're all going to steal now. When this comes out in my book, you'll have already heard it. He said, I need to use 3 software compressors to get close to the sound I would get with 1 analog compressor. And I thought, yeah, this is interesting. And it's not just about the gain staging, which is mega important, by the way, to everyone. Gain staging, these plugins are not made to be gained. They don't like being, they do not like being overloaded. And what he was saying was, he said, if you think about that little trick we all used to do with the 1176 catching peaks into an opto compressor like an LA2A, he said we kind of need to do that all the time with plugins to get close to that sort of sound where we're shaping or enveloping the sound. You can't achieve that with one, just with one compressor. And I guess the whole idea of how we parallel stuff now, I mean, I did used to use parallels, but it would tend to be maybe 3 on a vocal where maybe I'd got one that was dry, that I would just shape it to sound how I liked, how it was pleasing. Then I'd have another one that would be very heavily compressed and probably distorted as well, and I would balance that in. And then I'd have a third one where I took all the top and all the bottom out and I sent that to my effects. But now I found in the DAW, it's not uncommon for me to have 5, 6 tracks with a lead vocal, and they're all doing something. I'm mixing them like a color palette. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I can't get it. I definitely can't get it with, I take my hat off to anyone that can achieve that with just using 1 or 2 tracks. I don't know how they do it. I think there's a big myth actually with sound. Actually, I hear so many people say to me, "Oh, those, Dark Side of the," and I know you and I, we love Dark Side of the Moon. Wish You Were Here, and it's like, oh, those albums sounded so much better. It's like, no, they didn't sound much better. The songs were much better. But actually, if you look on a spectrogram, if you take two seconds out, no, they didn't. We're doing things with sound now you couldn't have even gone close to 30 or 40 years ago. I'm not denigrating them. I can sit and listen to Dark Side of the Moon. It was only when I started to explore the science of sound that I realized how much more we can actually accomplish with it. So,
wow.
That's good.
Probably the most in-depth into sound we've ever got them all.
It is. James, what about you for that question?
Oh, blimey. A good solid compressor, as in the sort of thing I would use every day to be honest.
Which DAW?
Okay, Pro Tools. Just Pro Tools. Because
so what about Hank? Hank, tell us which DAW you're using.
Because that makes a difference. I mean, to be honest, if you're in Pro Tools and you just need a compressor, use Dynamics 3 because it's perfectly serviceable. I mean,
yeah, he's in Pro Tools.
Dynamics 3. You've got all the controls there you need. It's not what I would refer to as a character compressor. You're not going to say, "Oh, that sounds like a 33609 Neve," which, by the way, I also love. Or an SSL G bus compressor. But let's also not pretend that all the G bus compressor plugins all sound the same. They do not. No. I have to admit to liking the Waves one over the UA one.
Yeah, me too.
And so does Spike, actually. So when I interviewed Spike is still using all the Waves SSL plugins.
Mm-hmm.
That's the one.
But he was involved. Wasn't he involved with the?
It was his SSL. Yeah. I was actually trying to avoid saying that because I wasn't sure that was common knowledge. But yeah, it was his SSL from the mix suite at Olympic.
Yeah, nice.
Hank is on Pro Tools, but he wants to use Luna, but he's on Windows. That is going to be an issue for a little while.
So Hank, can I share another thing with you? It's to do with a perceptual test I did with a bunch of participants about 3 years ago, and I have to be careful, don't I? Because no one's going to want to. No manufacturer will even talk to me after this. So what I did was I got a bunch of people to do mixes of stuff where they were only allowed to use stock plugins. So Dynamics 3. Actually, I think they could use the BF76, which is the old Bomb Factory in Pro Tools. And then I got another bunch of people to mix the same song. And I said, okay, use any plugin you want from any manufacturer. Do it whatever you like. Can I? You already know where I'm going with this, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's these, it's the ears, it's the you know what? Blaming the gear or saying that I can't. I've done this, so actually I'm empathizing with people that say, oh, I can't possibly make that record unless I have this tool. It doesn't wash with me anymore, I'm afraid. I hear amazing mixes from people who, so actually I'm going to name him actually because he just is I'm such a fan. John Leckie. Okay, so John shared with me how he's mixing his tracks these days. I've never seen such minimal use of plugins, and yet his mix sounds amazing. And I thought, do you know what? You don't actually really need half of these tools. We kind of use them as crutches quite often. But I think if you have, the main thing is, if you have a vision and you have a goal, then, so for me, I've never been a 10 insert person. If I can't get it within about 2 or 3 inserts, then I'm really annoyed with myself about it. And generally what happens is when you look at a sequence of inserts in someone's mix, they're usually correcting the problem they caused with the plugin before. I rely more heavily on parallels for that reason. I would go the route of using 1 or 2 plugins on 5 tracks rather than using 10 inserts on 1 track. Right. So I guess what I'm saying to you, Hank, what is this dude on about? He's going, is learn to use those tools that you have at your disposal in Pro Tools. Become accomplished with those before you start to worry too much about thinking, oh, if I don't have this tool, then I will not be able to achieve this result. Because I can share with you that all of these really good people who are mixing tracks, they really do not use, they probably use 20 plugins on all their mixes, and yet they have 800 in their folder, and they're probably using 20 of them.
I did a mix on a track today, and say I'm not at any moment putting myself actually in comparatively with either of the other 2 guys who are on this live stream when it comes down to being a mix engineer, because I'm not, or certainly any of the other luminaries that we've mentioned thus far. But yeah, I've probably got, well, in fact, I know I've got over 1,000 plugins, which is ridiculous. But I probably use 20.
But that's, you know, but that's, you know, mainly because of Pro Tools Expert and reviewing stuff.
But
and
I still only use 20 plugins.
Yeah.
I found the session today. I started this. I've been writing up. It's for a theme for a new event that Paul will eventually be doing when we start doing Cheer again. I had to write a 1:30 intro piece, like a spacey kind of thing. So I thought, right, I'll start using some VIs. I haven't used virtual instruments in about a year. And before that, probably a year before that, because it's not the sort of music I generally work with. I started digging out synthesizers and craziness and thinking, this is great. I can just start patching stuff in and twiddling knobs and stuff. And it was amazing. I've even dug some hardware synths out and started messing around with it. I had a great couple of days of messing around, which is the first time I've pulled out, say, instruments into a session, say in years.
Yeah.
But when I came to mixing, I put the same 10, 15 plugins on.
Or the other thing, which of course a lot of these guys are doing, is they're using guitar pedals. They're reamping through guitar pedals. There's so much of that goes on. I mean, distortion. It's funny, I'm writing this book about distortion, saturation, and coloration. And it's so funny, actually, because the first person I interviewed for this was Flood. And Flood, I could still remember getting the email. It's like, come and talk to me about one of the most misunderstood things in music production. And I thought, well, you know, you've done Depeche Mode, U2, 9 Inch Nails, and Smashing Pumpkins, not to mention kind of Birthday Party and all these amazing bands that just use distortion as part of their aesthetic. And I realized quite quickly, I mean, I've always messed around with distortion, you know, with pedals and all kinds of things, but he called it EQ for free. And I thought, yeah, that's exactly what it is, because what it's doing is it's adding harmonics. And it's interesting. One of the things I didn't mention to you, Paul, was I was actually kind of loosely involved in that SSL thing with Fusion. Oh, right. So I was involved in those initial perceptual tests, and where it came from was this. It was a statement I made in connection with my PhD. I was very interested in my PhD in the whole notion of retro nostalgia, vintage, all of those words. What do they mean in music production? And I talk to a lot of people who grew up using, tape and using old analog technologies, and then they'd come into the box and they're using. And the conclusion we all came to was that a lot of that sound that people talk about, that vintage sound, it's all about how you shape the transients. And what's his name? Dave Hill makes those amazing preamps, those Europa pre's.
Yeah.
And have you ever seen them? They've got speed controls.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting, because I thought, it's like up the other end, even here at home. I've got a pair of 1073s and I've got a pair of those API channel strips. Now, anyone that's used API, and Neve and SSL, these pre's are drastically different. They change sound. I'm not talking about EQ or compression. I'm talking about how they shape sound. And perceptually, they all suggest very different things. And John Leckie, when I was interviewing John, he was talking about when they went from the EMI disc on Dark Side of the Moon to the Neve console, which they installed at Abbey Road for doing Wish You Were Here. And he said everyone went, oh, wow, that desk, it sounds really slow. And it's like, or the EMI sounded really slow compared to and for me, Neve is a slow sound. What it does is it kind of, it's called the slew rate. So it's the change in the voltage rate. And if you have a passive summing mixer and you just run it through a pair of pre's, you'll get this, like is it the Silver Bullet, that thing you had, James? Or
yeah, Silver Bullet, yeah.
Louder and lifter. Yeah. So fusion is really based upon that. When you start to saturate sound in the way that a preamp would, what it does is it changes the envelope. Yeah. And it will change literally the attack and the release. And I think a lot of this thing that people hear when they go on about vintage is really about the shaping of the transients and the molding of the sound. Because what happens is, of course, when you change that envelope, the whole perception of what you're hearing completely changes. I mean, there are other elements to this, of course. There's high and low pass filtering. There's other kind of second and third order harmonics that are being added. But essentially, it's about changing the envelope of a sound. And if you hear something and you go, oh, that sounds very kind of, I don't know, Foo Fighters. In my head, I think, oh, well, maybe that's kind of for guitars. That's an API thing, which pushes the mid forward. I mean, you'll get all of this stuff, Paul, as well. It's like, it's all about shaping sound, It's all about controlling dynamics. This thing.
I love the idea of, well, I love reamping pedals, just sticking a pedal in a chain and stuff. It is unbelievable what you can pay for, a piece of hardware rack, and what you pay for a pedal, which is, I know they're much simpler, but
we were saying about compressors.
Yeah.
The best compressor I have ever used, bar none, is the.
This is going to be interesting. This.
No, do you know what it is? And Dan Hawkins agrees with me. I haven't got one here, but it's the compressor, Dark Glass, as in the amp manufacturer. He said,
bass amp manufacturer, yeah.
Bass amp manufacturer. Do a compressor pedal.
Oh, do they?
And I've actually said to them directly, you need to turn this into a rack unit. It is by far the best, most usable compressor I've ever heard. Certainly on bass.
Yeah.
And probably it's a kind of multi-mode. It's got an opto, something else, and their own magic compressor thing. And I swear, for 200 quid, it's the best compressor I've ever heard.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
it was absolutely blown away. So yeah, talking about pedals and stuff, it's just reminded me. I'll get one, and we'll review it or something.
We'll geek out.
Yeah. It's funny actually. You said about SSL Fusion, Gary. I had one of the first ones in the UK that hit the press circuit. And I said, I love this so much. I don't want to give it hyperluminal. Thank you, SDR. That's the one. It's amazing. I had one of the first SSL Fusions in the country, and I said, I want to buy this, please. I love it. They went, you can't. That one's sold. It was one of those. It totally caught them off guard. I think they bought about 50 units into the UK and had back orders for 500.
I think it sounds. I mean, I heard, and I've never actually used one in the flesh, but every review I heard of it, I thought it sounded fantastic.
Yeah, it was one of those things I went.
Weirdly, it took me so long, so I helped out with that.
Yeah,
it
well
took
done.
Me 8 months to get one.
8 months.
I want one. I still want one.
So actually, yeah, I mean, they're doing some great. I mean, Andy Jackson, really, who's the head of analog products there now since Chris Jenkins. Andy Jackson is brilliant. He's a genius. I mean, and he has great vision because he kind of knows. A lot of this is about knowing the way people work now. People don't work the same way they worked even 10 years ago. They're working in a totally different way. And I think people are looking for one or two key kind of color boxes that make a difference. And actually the compressor I was going to make. So my Desert Island compressor is, and I've used a lot of them, is the Highland Dynamics Bg2. I've never heard that. For me, that's a Verimue. And it has a British and an American switch on it, which just brings in more transformers.
I've never heard of that.
No, it's an amazing compressor. Highland Dynamics. It's kind of like the old, what was the mono Fairchild? It was the 670, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It's got the similar kind of thing to that Fairchild. But actually, the interesting part, and so this goes back to I don't have one anymore, but I used to have an LA2A as well. And probably the most interesting thing about both of these compressors is they sound amazing even when they're not compressing. They do something to the sound. So the transformers, and I think quite often we look in the wrong place for where the color is, and actually we're thinking, oh yeah, that compressor's great, because it colors and actually you probably could just wire up, with a pair of XLRs, a transformer, and you get close to kind of some of that thing.
Who's probably got that? Matt Colton, who was at Alchemy and is now at Metropolis Mastering.
Yeah,
has got 2 enormous transformers on top of his kind of console with XLRs in for exactly that.
Really?
For exactly that. Just put some transformer tone in. Good chunk. I always wanted them to have those big kind of
electrical.
Yeah, they like something out of the Addams Family. They all kind of junk, that kind of big mechanical switch thing. But no, sadly not. We should dive into some of these questions because we've actually got some. Michael Horowitz says, hello, Michael. Using the Mag EQ, how do you balance the 40K boost for air, but not get overzealous? I like it too much. And I agree. I do tend to wind in a bit too.
I used to have a similar thing actually with the Clariphonic EQ. I don't know if any of you have ever used the Clariphonic.
Yeah, that's the Cush one.
Yeah, it's like a drug. It's like oh my god, this thing is just there cannot be enough of this. I guess the thing with the Mag is I'll be careful how I don't want to say anything is a poor person's version of something. But okay, there was one EQ for me in the studio which had to be with me for every mix, and that was a George Massenberger GML 8200. Okay, that was the EQ. And the magic for that, I never used to use the mid-range at all. I'd probably use or even the low. I'd probably try and use a Pultec for that. But nothing could touch the air that you would get from that EQ. But the interesting thing with it was that it wasn't the 16 or the 18K or even the 20K. It was I think it was the 26 that it was a click on there. It was the 26K, and what you'd do is you'd add about sort of 4 dB of that, and it would just literally just open up the whole top end of your mix. So I think this 40K thing it's a bit of a red herring, isn't it? It's not, it's not the 40K. Of course, my ears probably I can't hear anything above about 17K, but it's the gentle slope that goes up to that. That's the bit, that's the magic there. Did I answer your question? Probably not.
No, I think it's I totally agree. It's the fact that you're boosting 40K by 10 dB doesn't mean you're boosting 20K at 10 dB. It means the curve is doing its thing. So yeah, I completely agree. I've been known to wind it up and go, well, hang on, hold your horses, because you're going to take someone's head off who's got a better monitoring solution than you've got.
On what? On the Marg?
Yeah.
No, I think I've got a Marg down. I've got the Marg down here, and mine's on. I constantly have that 40 on cranked up, And speaking to Cliff Marg, that was his recommendation. He said just crank it. Yeah.
It does make everything just sound clear and lovely and
fantastic. Yeah, I love it. I love that thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, can I just stop? Hank, thank you for it is Hank, isn't it? Yes. Hank said he signed up for the top tier membership. I think he means the Studio Rats membership. Hank, I haven't received any notification. Can you just send me an email on our website, which is thestudiorats.net? Send me an email and we'll get it sorted.
Anyway, actually, going back to Hank's question earlier, compressor and EQ, if I was going to get one, actually, and this is because I'm prejudiced by growing up on an SSL, I'd probably get either the Waves or the UAD SSL channels. Actually, even the Plugin Alliance ones are great as well. Actually, all three of those, and I love the fact that I can quickly flick the order. The secret weapon on the SSL was always the filters, though, the high and the low pass filters. You know, you can. In fact, before I learned how to mix, someone said to me, "Just learn how to use the filters on an SSL. You'd be amazed at how good you can make your mix sound without even doing anything else other than filtering." Obviously, you need an ear for balance, you know. But
I had in fact, I emailed you on this. I had to do a video on another brand of SSL plugin.
Yeah,
the Antelope one. And I was getting some weird anomalies with, you know, the difference between what someone would call a gate and an expander. because in the world of me, an expander is the opposite to a compressor, not the opposite to a gate, which of course it is. But in an SSL, it makes it a gate. I don't entirely know how or why.
With the range.
Yeah.
Knob. Yeah.
And I went, this is awesome, because you can get that really bitey, clicky kick drum sound just by using the expander over the gate.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I'm loving this. No need to wind in loads of top end to get that kind of clicky, metally bass drum sound. Just use the expander. I was like, this is phenomenal.
Yeah. Well, you remember I talked to you about the limp-wristed hi-hat players, which you're not one of, by the way. But you've got someone who's just playing a basic eighth kind of tata, 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 and they're not leaning on it. An expander's often a good cheat for getting that to accentuate that. It was also great for toms as well. You know, if you want a bit more whack in your toms, then an expander is, you know, that was the kind of go-to.
Love it. Just great stuff. Hang on, I saw another one there somewhere. It's all about removing the comments in low. Yeah, I think there's lots of people saying agreeing wholeheartedly, which is all good. You know, it's all about these things on the side of our head and the thing in the middle of our head, which all gets forgotten about.
I think also just
rack unit.
Yeah, I think it's really important to stress as well in these kind of forums that certainly with my experience with, I mean, I'm definitely not on the level of, you know, some of these people we're talking about, the sort of, you know, the Spike Stenson that of this world. You know, I kind of am in awe of their talent. But one of the things that I think we all need to understand is that these people are just trying stuff out. They actually get it wrong too, and also they often, I mean, certainly Dave Bascom for me, I mean, Seeds of Love, it's just like one of the albums for me in the 90s.
Oh, yeah.
Dave just fiddles, he said, I just fiddle around with it until it sounds good. And he goes, every mix I've ever done in my entire career has sounded just utterly shit at one point. And then I've done one or two things to it, and that actually is my experience too. Most things, I don't think I've ever done anything where I've just enjoyed it from start to finish and thought, oh yeah, it really is a journey. I mean, the only thing I have learned is that I like a little period to myself. I mean, hey, it's easy to isolate in the moment, but years ago when you would have to have artists in the control room with you, I used to hate that. I used to be like, no, this isn't really what I'm, you know, if I want to go and put like an octave pitch change on the vocal just because I just want to try it, and then I want to send that out to a guitar effects pedal, you can't really do that with the singer in the room, can you? Or you've got the guitarist and the bass player and they're both competing, you know, the thing. It's really important to have that creative period in a mix where you're not trying to. So in other words, this balance between technical and aesthetic, it's very different. That's a very different headspace, which is why I try to do all of my prep work and tidying up and stuff before I sit down and mix something. Because once I start mixing, I just want to be creative with it. I don't want to be working out, okay, so these vocals haven't been, or this guitar solo hasn't been comped here, so which one is it? And the classic is the artist says, I don't know, what do you think? And you're going, I don't know, he's in my record. You know, it's I think separating those two spaces is really important. And Peter Gabriel talks a lot about that. I mean, this is not my idea. SSL, when he was still part of that company, he used to talk about this alpha and zen thing. And he's famous for like never being able to make decisions, you know, and he can make 15 years to make an album. And the one thing he never does is he never does this kind of editing thing whilst he's being creative. He really differentiates between those two kind of those two spaces, if you like. And I think that's probably one of the main things that I've learned, is that idea that you need to continually be surprised. So even if you're Spike Stent, I can assure you he still wants to try stuff and be surprised by things, and probably will go down a pathway that doesn't work, and then he'll have to come back and try something else. So I don't know why I'm using Spike as a, you know, Al Schmidt, you know, all of these great people, they all know this.
I think as well that there is a belief that having 1,000 tracks means that you should use 1,000 tracks.
Yeah.
And having, say, I was laughing Paul the other day. I said, normally if I've got anything more than 32, 40 tracks in an arrangement, I've probably got too many.
Yeah.
Already, I know that. And saying if you are, there is a disconnect these days, or sometimes there is, between the artist and the mixer. Very, very rarely now does a mixer or a producer come on at the beginning of a project. The beginning of the project is the artist and their notepad writing down stuff, and then they'll play some things, and then they'll maybe do a demo session. That demo session then might get morphed into the main session that becomes the album. Very rarely now are there just like 4-track demos done. Because everyone's got Pro Tools. Everyone can take that Pro Tools session from their bedroom to Abbey Road. It could be the same session, whereas in the old days it would have been a cassette 4-track that then gets played to a bunch of musicians, who are then going to be the musicians who play on the album in the Wrecking Crew style. You know, there is that disconnect between the beginning of there was a disconnect between the beginning of the project and the end of the project. Now it's the same person seeing the same idea all the way through, and I think at some point there needs to be someone to say, and it used to be the role of the producer to say, no, stop, that's not working, you know. But because artists are now so entrenched in the whole process, because they know how to use Pro Tools, or they think they do, they know how to apply a plugin, or they think they do, they know they can record 15 different guitar solos, and then someone else can make the decision later. I think where I'm going with this, or trying to go with this, is commit. If you get a solo that you like, make sure that's the top of the list. If for some reason something musically clashes, and the engineer, the producer, or the mixer decides that is not right, it musically sounds bad, or they decide it sounds bad, give them some other options. But at least say, this is the one, this is the one I like, this is the one I want to use. Because the chances are they'll probably go with it anyway.
And I think the other thing, I think the points you're making are brilliant, James. And I think another word that I would offer, maybe, I don't know time-wise where you are on this, but a final thought here maybe is this word resistance. You need resistance when you're making records. And actually this comes from, so I was at Hull University last year, and we interviewed Brian Eno, and Eno is known to be this antagonistic he offers the resistance in any production, and the classic is U2, where and I think I was going to mention this at the beginning, but the idea is he hates guitars and drums, hates them. And he spends his entire, and I always remember there was this room that, it was Cenzo's and Stephen Street's room actually, and it had we were doing, you know, that you know, that No Line on the Horizon album there, and there was a knock before you enter on the door, and Eno changed it to rock before you enter, which I thought was just hilarious, actually. And I just think when you're making a record, even if it's just you and, you know, plenty of people who are making, you know, solo, you know, producers and artists, you do need something there to offer you some resistance, because it's very, very difficult to, and you were making this point more elegantly than me, actually, James, which is it's very, very hard to kind of see the wood for the trees sometimes when you're producing a record.
Yeah, totally. I take my hat off to the, let's face it, the latest poster person, poster child, poster girl for this is Billie Eilish.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
you know, it's absolutely amazing. But there's also been plenty of other discussions that have gone along the lines of, I'm fairly sure a mastering engineer was involved there, and I'm fairly sure a mix engineer was involved there, and other people. So get other sets of ears, even if it's only your mum.
Mm-hmm.
Get them to listen to what.
I don't think anyone should trust their mum's ears.
My mum's brutal. She always says to me, "Too much. Nah, it's too much going on. I can't hear this. I can't hear that." My mum's got. Bear in mind, my mum's been listening to my stuff since the the mid '80s.
Wow.
On cassette 4-tracks.
Gated reverbs on snares. Yeah.
What's wrong with that? Love it.
Nothing.
I love it.
Non-Lin on an AMS.
There's 3 questions to end with. Hank says, I've been looking for a solid limiter to bring my projects up to good levels. Have any of you tried the UAD Brainworks plugin? I've been using the Pro Tools stock, but sometimes I notice clipping when I test the mix.
There are two limiters in Pro Tools you need to use, or one or t'other. One is the Massey 2009, I think it's
2007. Brilliant.
2007. Or the Pro Tools the Avid Pro limiter. It's by far the easiest limiter to use, and you don't get artifacts. You can drive it to destruction and you still don't get pumping or artifacts. It's amazing. I mean, don't drive it to destruction, but it's very forgiving.
Can I do a couple of suggestions?
Yeah, go on.
If you just want to bring stuff up, L2. And if you want, like on a mix, this might be controversial. Slate FGX, I think is fantastic on a mix bus.
Yeah, the other one I like is, what's the UAD one? The UAD Brainworks one.
I think that's the one he's talking about. He said that.
What's it? Master Desk.
Oh, I love it.
Oh, that's brilliant. Yeah, I did. I've done some stuff on that.
I know you have. It's
brilliant. Some stuff on that. It's really good. That's a bit like the color. That's a bit like a color box.
Yeah.
And actually, the Vertigo that they also Brainworks, and also the Vertigo, the VS3 or whatever.
Yes, is awesome.
They
do a really good EQ as well. Vertigo do an amazing. I think it's a red color. It's a hardware unit, but they've modeled it and it's amazing.
Oh, nice. Safey says, "Why is chorus effect associated with the 80s? Is it much less used nowadays?" I think I've got a thing on this, but go on.
I love chorus.
Absolutely. So, for me, it was the Dimension D, the Roland Dimension D, and obviously, there's a great. Actually, you know, I tell you, who's just brought. He's making that really cheap gear at the moment. It's not Behringer, actually. It's
TC.
Clark Technic.
It's another Behringer company, I think.
Yeah, they make a Dimension D, and it's about 160 quid. And I spoke to Chenzo about it the other day, and he went, "It sounds amazing." He said, "Have you heard?" And he's got 3 original Dimension Ds. And he said, "This thing is amazing." He said, "It sounds so good." So, yeah, I mean, it really starts with a Boss C2 chorus pedal, doesn't it? Yeah. Is it much less used? I don't think it is. I just think people deal with it differently, don't they? I mean, I don't know, Drew.
I don't think it's used to the point where, you know, on the lead guitar solo, you've got a ton of delay and heavy distortion and big chorus, giving you that whole kind of hair metal
80s Lukather.
Yeah, and I've got no problem with that. because that's just
that's you all over. Yeah,
that's me all over. I love a bit of chorus. I was using it on strings today. It was great to make strings, sci-fi strings with that kind of thing. It was amazing.
Do you think? I think in the 80s it was, well, this might be controversial, but I think in the 80s it depends on what instrument it was used. But do you find that sometimes it was used on vocals as a bit of a pitch hider?
Yeah.
Hider. Is that a word?
yeah. Totally. I mean that AMS trick, that was what it was.
And on different instruments, probably for, I mean, it depends if it was a stereo. If it's a stereo chorus, to add some stereo width or some fake stereo width, as it were.
Yeah.
Anyone else got any thoughts on that, or any other chorusy thoughts?
No, so I am not someone who's shy of chorus because I like it. I was using it on strings today. I've been using it on guitars. It's funny, chorus on clean guitar, that hasn't gone away.
No.
It's not a super compressed strat anymore. It's not that kind of "is this love?" bong bong bong, that sort of sound. I really shouldn't sing this time of night. Well, ever.
It was beautiful for me.
Well, the internet's doing wonderful things. That clearly enough chorus was applied, but I don't think chorus has gone away. I don't think it's as obviously used anymore. It's not quite so in your face, but it's definitely still there.
No, and I think also you got to. I mean, we have time to get into this whole panorama and depth and things like that and mixing, but I think it's really important to remember if you want to make something stereo, it's not a left and right. I remember Bob Clearmountain. I remember having a surreal chat at a party one night with Bob Clearmountain about mixing. Probably he was bored and I was the only person there who talked to. And it was remember that time when there were loads of Line 6 pods over everything. And he said, it's so annoying. He said, I just spend my whole life either panning both to one side or both to the other side or muting one side. And he said, because the problem is if everything's in stereo, you just get two lots of mono, don't you? And I thought that was such a great statement. And I think it's really important when you're mixing to think about where you're placing stuff in the stereo field. And quite often having just the chorus on the opposite side to the instrument you're treating. I mean, I love extreme, I mean, we haven't really talked about, my musical taste. I'm still stuck with Kid A and Radiohead, I mean, Radiohead for me, what Nigel Godrich does with sound is just amazing for me. That kind of extreme stereo field and the way that he can have stuff so dry. So it's like right there in your face. But I think just if you've got everything that you're trying to spread out in a mix, it's way less effective than having one or two key things that I don't know. I mean, Trevor Horn used to use this trick where he would never pan the instruments in his mix. It was probably Julian Mendelssohn or Steve Lipson, where it would be kind of 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock, and he'd leave this bit outside for all the reverbs and the choruses and all of those.
Awesome.
That's great. And people used to go, why do his mixes sound so much wider than everyone? Well, actually, they were narrower, but the effects were outside of everything.
Yeah,
if you've got a grand piano and you record the room or whatever, the concert hall, and you pan the piano like kind of left and right hand like that. I don't know what perspective it'll be on here, but then put the room just outside of it. It's amazing how damn wide it will sound. And I think also, I mean, now something we were definitely not doing in the 80s, other than maybe occasionally with miking up, we're using a lot of mid-side now. So you can remove frequencies from middle and side that you could never do, and you can really mess with space. I do. The final thing I'll say on this though is I still really rely very heavily on mono compatibility. It always has to work in mono for me. I'm always checking it.
Interesting. Gary, I knew tonight we would cover some topics.
Can I just answer the last question?
Yeah.
From SDR. SDR said, question for Paul, how are you finding the key threes? I love them. I think they're amazing.
He gets up in the morning, walks in the studio, and there they are on the desk.
I wish I could afford them. They're brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah, they're great. The thing is, it's so easy and every time I hear people talk about the speakers that they own or a piece of equipment that they own, you instantly go, "Oh, they own it. Of course, they're going to say that."
Yeah.
But I heard the Key 3s. We were around. I was in one studio.
Well, I heard them on the launch. I heard them on the launch date.
Did you? Wow.
Blown away by them.
Yeah, they're amazing. Yeah.
And 2.5 hours later of playing, I've got one that will sound really good. You know, a listening party where everyone's trying to do the one-upmanship, and everyone goes, you know, all the classics come around.
Are they 2 or 3 ways, Paul?
10.
Six ways. 1, 2, 3.
Wow.
6. They're six ways.
Good God.
Yeah, and I don't know what the technology is. It's something like I don't know what happens, but it's something about the way that it balances all the frequencies and all of the timing. I mean, I used to have a Trinov and some Amphions.
Yeah, that's what I use, Amphions now.
They're great. Yeah, sound fantastic. I just couldn't get the bottom end out of the Amphions that I wanted. No. But they sound amazing. They sound great.
I've got a sub actually. I have to confess.
Have you?
With my
Oh,
Amphions,
great. Yeah, no, Amphions are great.
Yeah.
And then
I've got some new speakers coming.
Ooh.
But I will share that at another point when they're in and I'm happy. And I don't think they'll be needing Trinoving either.
Nice.
Wow.
Which is interesting.
Nice.
Some good toys coming. I haven't bought them because they're really blooming expensive.
Yeah, I think speakers are expensive, aren't they?
Good ones are.
Expensive,
yeah.
We should wrap this one up because we're getting on and we've chatted for. So I knew we would cover some topics tonight. I knew we'd cover some ground. But Gary, thank you so much for joining.
Cheers, Gary.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really interesting.
Absolute pleasure.
Thank you out there for joining us as well. If you've got any more questions for us, join us next week. Same bat time. Same. Do the clocks change?
I think they go back. I think they do go back this weekend.
So next week it will be 8 p.m. GMT, Greenwich Mean Time. I don't know who we'll have a guest. I don't know who it'll be. We don't think that far ahead, to be honest.
Nah, we're so unorganised.
Once again, thank you, Gary. Thank you for joining us.
Gary. Yeah.
We must we must catch up for that socially distanced beer very soon. And good night to everyone out there in YouTube and Facebook land. We will see you again very soon. Take care, everyone.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers.